Welcome everyone. The webinar will begin shortly and will be recorded. Connect with the campaign for grade level reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR. On Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. And on LinkedIn, follow us at Campaign for GLR. Please use hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learned from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, we would love to connect. So on Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR. On Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. And on LinkedIn, follow us at Campaign for GLR. Okay, welcome again everyone to today's webinar. My name is Sierra Sanchez and I'll be behind the scenes helping to produce this conversation. I have just a few housekeeping details before we get started. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself. So please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city or state, and your organization. Be sure when responding to select both panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage your engagement by posting questions in the Q&A box. We'll dedicate some time at the end of the session to answer all of the questions you post. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording, as well as all resources that you see shared as links in the chat, will be compiled and shared in a follow-up email to all webinar registrants. And finally, we'll be posting a brief on-screen evaluation during Q&A and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. Finally, before we begin, I would like to call your attention to our upcoming GLR Learning Tuesdays webinars. Later this afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, we invite you to come back for a session co-sponsored with Overdeck Family Foundation on innovation in parent and educator supports critical to kindergarten readiness. Next week on May 24th, we'll have a session focused on elevating educators, investing in teacher professional development for long-term payoff. And finally, we'll invite you to close off the month of May with a session at 3 p.m. on May 31st on prioritizing early relational health in tutoring for equitable learning recovery. Registration and more information for these sessions will be posted in the chat box now, and we hope you can join us. Joining you now is Bonnie Howard, Senior Fellow with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for this Funder to Funder conversation. There's still time, promoting the child tax credit. My name is Bonnie Howard, and I'm a Senior Fellow with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. I'll be serving as your moderator for today's session. In many ways, this is part 2 of a conversation we started back in November of last year. In that session, we explored the ways in which funders could build on the work of grantee partners and fill gaps to leverage the expansion of the Child Tax Credit, CTC, a federal credit that provides money to support American families, helping them make ends meet more easily, afford the cost of raising children, or save for their children's future. Next slide. Actually, you can go to the next one. In March of last year, the president signed the American Rescue Plan, which included an expansion to the child tax credit. Keep in mind that at that time, we were very much in the throes of a pandemic. Children were not in school, parents lost income, housing became even more unstable for many families, and the stress, I would say, took all of us to new depths. But one of the bright spots was the expansion of the child tax credit, a policy of historic proportion, a universal child allowance, which was fully refundable and extended eligibility to 23 million kids previously denied the full credit because their families earned too much money. The credit increased from $2,000 to up to $3,600 per qualifying child. Parents and guardians of 17-year-old children are now eligible, and for the first time, millions of families received advanced monthly payments worth up to half of the annual credit. These payments are making a huge difference in the lives of children and families. This additional income has helped families avert a long list of economic hardship. So while the deadline for filing taxes may have passed, we still have the opportunity to help families. And we know that when we support parents, kids do better. We really do need to be in this for the long haul. So with that as a little bit of a backdrop, I want to get started with today's session. where we're going to hear from a senior advisor from the White House, national and local funders, and those who support funder collaboratives. They'll share how they're promoting the child tax credit and talk about the actionable ideas for funders to take that will support this historic opportunity. Many of those ideas have been captured in Delivery Associates' new report, Expanded CTC Learning and Delivery Agenda, which highlights what worked and also what didn't in 2021, and includes a set of strategies for the field to consider implementing to further test in 2022. This compilation of lessons learned offers a set of strategies designed to increase access to the credit and gives us insight into the particular role that funders can play. But first, let me introduce you to a group of women who are going to lead this conversation for us this afternoon. Shelley Waters Boots is the principal at SWB Solutions. She brings over 25 years of experience as a writer, researcher, and policy expert on issues affecting the lives of low-income children and families. She runs a philanthropic consulting business where she advises a number of leading foundations on investment strategy, research, policy, and communications. In the past, she was a researcher at the Urban Institute and has honed additional skills in senior positions at the New America Foundation and the Children's Defense Fund. And really kind of most important for me, she's been my partner and co-conspirator in the development and execution of this webinar. Shelley helped lead the November conversation and brings a wealth of expertise and information to our discussion today. Next is Sarah McKitterick. Sarah recently joined Code for America as the Senior Tax Benefit Outreach Manager, where she now works alongside government agencies to connect their clients to tax credits. Before joining, Sarah led a portfolio to increase Massachusetts residents' access to public benefits at the Shaw Family Foundation. This included the creation of findyourfunds.org coalition and a nationally recognized outreach strategy that connected individuals who didn't typically file for taxes to thousands of dollars in credits. Sarah also led outreach in the Massachusetts Pandemic EBT with a focus on communications and school district partnerships. She's worked in Cambodia and Australia, where she managed community and government relations at organizations that supported women and children. Next up is Amy Nagel. She is the co-director of Economic Opportunity Funders and coordinator for the EITC Funders Network. Throughout her career, she's conducted strategic planning and initiative development, authored numerous research and policy reports, designed public information campaigns, and gathered data for field studies in human service, economic security, justice reform, civic engagement, and education issues. Ali Urbanski is with the Community Foundation for Greater Buffalo. In her role at the foundation, she works as a member of the Community Impact Team, supporting the foundation's leadership and policy work while promoting the goals of advancing education, racial and ethnic equity, the environment, arts, and culture. Prior to her role at the foundation, she spent time working with organizations and progressive companies, helping them mobilize large-scale campaigns for social change. She too worked in Cambodia in the nonprofit sector, analyzing market trends and implementing strategies related to school social sustainability in the hospitality industry. And our last panelist that I want to introduce you to is Simone Brody. She is a senior advisor at the White House on the American Rescue Plan implementation team, providing guidance, support, and accountability on critical ARP programs. Simone previously served as the executive director of What Works Cities, a Bloomberg Philanthropies initiative, partnering with mayors and city leaders around the country to improve the effectiveness of local government. Simone's career spans the nonprofit, public, and private sectors. She led evaluation and accountability for the New York City Department of Education and began her career in finance. First in investment banking with Goldman Sachs, and then at Ascend Ventures, investing in early stage education and technology companies. So with that, I think we're ready to get started. And I thought it might make sense for us to start with Simone by kicking us off, kind of telling us about the federal landscape and set the context for the conversation. What should we expect? What can we hope for? How can we be helpful? And so I give it to you, Simone, to get us started.
Thank you so much, Bonnie, and great to see all of you here. I'm Simone Brody, and really thank you for just the incredible work you do. I have been in your shoes and know how hard it is to do the outreach on the ground and learning a lot about what it looks like on the federal side as well. So thanks for participating in the meeting. And I am just going to start by maybe doing a quick refresh of what Bonnie said about the kind of Child Tax Credit 101 to make sure we all kind of are aligned on the real significance of these dollars. As Bonnie mentioned, the American Rescue Plan really expanded the child tax credit for 2021 from $2,000 to $3,600 for children under 6 and $3,000 for children between 6 and 17. The American Rescue Plan also for the first time made the child tax credit fully refundable, which really means that for the first time, 27 million of the lowest income taxpayers in the country are getting the full benefit for the first time. And so just as an illustration, signing up new families that haven't engaged in the tax system, that haven't filed their taxes, is really providing life-changing support. I talked to a mom last week. She was the parent of 4 children who had not filed her taxes. She got outreach from a local CBO in Philadelphia. She had heard about the child tax credit, didn't think it was for her because she didn't file taxes, but she was able to access it. And for the first time in her life at 45 years old, has been able to pay off her debt and is actually putting a down payment on a house in a much better community for her family. And so these dollars, tens of thousands of dollars for families with multiple children and really providing just life-changing support. So for families that filed their taxes in 2019 or 20, the Treasury and the IRS paid out the first half of the child tax credit in 2021, and the second half will be paid out in this coming year. And so last year, more than 37 million families with more than 61 million children received that first half payment. Those payments across the government, totaled over $90 billion. This is providing both tax relief to middle-class families and also is a really powerful weapon against poverty. What our data from last year shows is that 50% of payments were going to families that earned less than $50,000. And so really providing tax relief across the board. And what we saw in just a few months that we actually implemented the program last year, so the first payments went out last July, what we saw is that it really is having an unprecedented and consistent impact on child poverty. So research suggests that the number of Black and Hispanic families eligible for this credit has now doubled. A number of organizations have done research on the impact of this. Last year, Columbia University found that those who received the first payment experienced a 43% decline in food insufficiency, and that the share of parents who missed mortgage payments or rent payments or had difficulty with expenses dramatically declined also last summer with the first payments. And so, as I said, we have 61 million kids who are receiving it from 37 million families. But what we know is that we are still missing millions of children and families who need to file a tax return to access the benefit. And really almost anybody with children is eligible, even those with no income, even those that are claiming other credits. I think that that is something that we really need to make sure gets across to as many people as possible. I think sometimes when people hear sort of child tax credit and they haven't been engaged in the tax system, they really think that this isn't for them. And frankly, those are the people we are trying to most reach, because it is really providing, a form of direct payment to support families in raising their children. And so I want to talk a little bit now about the outreach efforts that you all have been participating in, but some of these great panelists will talk to you about in more detail, because I think it is really critical both to the child tax credit, but frankly, to the work you and all of us are doing to make sure that our most vulnerable families understand and have access to the supports that government and other partners are providing. And so the Biden-Harris administration really is trying to lead a whole of government effort to reach every eligible family. And I think that one of the big lessons that we have learned in this and in many other policies is that certainly kind of child tax credit exemplifies that policy matters tremendously. It is incredible that this was passed. It is having an incredible impact, but it also shows that implementation matters just as much and probably matters more in some cases to our most struggling families. And so I think as we think about outreach learnings and what we are doing on outreach, we can translate these lessons into basically any of the benefits and any of the ways we're trying to support families. And I think that's another reason this has been so powerful. So just to talk a little bit about the actual outreach efforts that we have seen, and then we'll turn it over to others to really talk about the work on the ground. So in order to receive this, as I said, you must file your taxes in some form. So we know that some people have filed taxes last year to get the first half payment. They have to file taxes again this year to get access to the second half of the payment. And then again, for the millions of families that are not in the tax system, they must file this year and they will get the full payment. So again, up to $3,600 per child, depending on the age of your child. What we at the government at the federal level have done is a few things. One is we launched a website, childtaxcredit.gov. I think we found it was very important to have a .gov site, which is a kind of friendly, plain language, one-stop site to answer questions about the child tax credit, but also to connect families and individuals to resources. We are very excited to have partnered with Code for America last year to create the first simplified filing tool, getctc.org. And this tool really is essentially helping families file their taxes in a very simple way. As we all know, even for those of us that understand the tax system a little bit more, it is very hard to engage and file your taxes. For families that have not engaged in the system, it is daunting, it is intimidating, and there are many misconceptions around it. And so the Code for America Simplified Filing Tool is really an easy interview style tool that makes filing taxes much more accessible. It's mobile friendly, it's bilingual. It was piloted last year and really had some very positive responses from individuals that filled it out. And we're really here trying to reach families that are just trying to enter the tax system to get access to this specific credit. And so we relaunched that last week. And the childtaxcredit.gov, the government site, also really directs people there as one of the primary places to help file taxes. So in addition to the kind of government site and the simplified filing tool, we've just seen incredible outreach happening at all levels of government that you're going to hear a bit more about today. But the Social Security Administration is doing outreach to all 27 million digital subscribers for Social Security. We have efforts across the federal government. We'll hear about some great state text campaigns. We have local governments partnering with CBOs to do outreach on the ground. And so really excited for all of these efforts. I will say, I think that at the federal level, we knew it was going to be hard to reach our most vulnerable families. It is harder than we, I think, even expected. And part of that is, there's a lot of misconceptions about filing taxes. There's a lot of concern about its impact on other benefits. And we are looking for a very specific population of families. So many people, as I said, have already received it. So we're trying to find the families that haven't received it. We're then trying to overcome kind of barriers and hurdles to make sure they understand it and can actually access it. And then again, the implementation of is there a tool and a system for them to easily file? And so I really am excited for all the energy that we've seen around this. We've learned a lot, and I'm really eager for continued learning and hope that you all will jump in. We're thinking a lot about back to school outreach. Obviously, this is a huge opportunity at the school level. There was some great outreach that happened last year, whether it was school districts texting families. We had a great parent-led effort where parent volunteers were finding other parents. But again, this is really a space that needs some more evidence building. And so hoping to have more and more partners jump in and find out where are you already engaged with potentially eligible families? How do you share this information with a simplified tool? It could be as easy as saying, you can sign up, find the getctc.org and enroll, but really trying to figure out how to find families where they are, provide them the information they need, and then help them enroll. So thank you so much for having me. I'm going to let you get to the meat of the conversation and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Simone. Really appreciate you giving us kind of the big picture and setting the context for what we are working with and some of the great resources we have, as well as what we're up against. I think in this space, I just want to let folks know Simone may not be able to stay with us for the entire webinar today, but we'll keep her as long as we can. So thank you so much. I think we're going to move now to talk for Shelley. And Shelley, what I'm hoping you're going to do is talk to us a little bit about the Delivery Associates report. I know there were really some great ideas that were captured that are ready for prime time and are going to be of particular interest to funders and others in the room. But first, before we do that, share a little bit about the funder collaborative that made the decision to really support the development of the report.
Sure, and thanks for having me. Great to be with you all here. Yeah, actually a little bit organically, a group of foundations, some at the national level, some at the state, some at the local level, some who'd been funding in tax policy for decades, and others who were really new to the issue but understood the importance of the moment, started to coalesce. It was about 35 foundations. And I think Simone and I added up that maybe something close to $50 million moved at the end of last year, both for outreach and all the things that Simone was talking about, and getting more creative about finding the families who were eligible for these really important benefits, but also the advocacy work to continue to expand the child tax credit, and for policymakers to understand the importance of CTC in the lives of children and families. You know, we were sort of midstream. We stood this CTC monthly payments up last year really quickly. Kudos to the IRS and Treasury and the White House for really getting something the IRS had never done before, which was distributing checks automatically into people's bank accounts where they had the information for child tax credits. And really sort of standing up an infrastructure to really make sure that the IRS and Treasury were engaged with families who could benefit from this child tax credit. So at kind of midstream, which was the end of 2021, beginning of 2022, before we were really diving into a full tax season, several funders from that network came together and decided to fund a really deep dive, talking to a lot of community-based organizations, community-based foundations, and others to figure out what are we learning, what can we do better next time, what's this sort of playbook for 2022 that we should be trying to do. So that's kind of the genesis of the work. And big shout out to the Schusterman Foundation, the Annie Casey Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, and the Packard Foundation, which all were contributors to funding the report.
Oh, thank you, Shelley. And so now sort of to the meat of the issue, give us a little bit about, so what were the findings? Like, what do we know now, lessons that were learned about the past 6 months that we've been in this outreach in space? What do we know that we can learn from?
Yeah, and this is summarizing about a 90-page report and a lot of shorter executive summaries and short sort of summaries for particular audiences, government, CBOs, philanthropy. So I'm doing a very, very high level. There's a lot more meat. And I think Sarah already put it in the chat, the link to all the reports. But I'll say two things. One was really thinking about outreach through the eyes of the user and thinking about a user journey. So as you sit in communities and at foundations, really thinking about where on the user journey you feel like your foundation can be helpful. So are you creating awareness? And awareness can be anything like bus ads or kind of, you know, PSAs, or just letting people know that this is an issue in the community that people are eligible for. Then there's sort of the engagement phase that Simone talked a bit about, where we have some barriers and bias and fear, or not clear understanding, like mixed status families. So there's a lot of engagement work that happens, a lot of, as Simone said, kind of retail conversations, CBO-led, trusted partner kind of in work that many engage with at the local level. And then there's a space around enrollment. Like once you get somebody who was, okay, I'm ready to figure this out, how do you get them enrolled? What are the tools? And then finally, receipt of the payment. So really thinking about the user journey, and this document lays out that very well, and some of the best practices in each one of those. Now, just sort of jumping immediately to where delivery associates and the field really said, here's the places to go deeper in 2022. There are 5 areas that I'll highlight. And you're going to hear about all of these from the speakers today. Number 1, and seems to be a really good bet, is philanthropy, especially partnering with state and local agencies. We find that a lot of families are already on Medicaid, SNAP, or TANF. So partnering with local agencies and your role in a community, and really helping to ensure that local agencies and state governments are really pushing out information about this is a key takeaway, and something they recommend we continue to do. Number 2, funding tax filing capacity. As you know, if you think about this, we have a $90 billion program that's leaning on a volunteer-based infrastructure, which is VITA. So you could, as a local funder, be thinking about VITA and other tax infrastructure, even past the filing, because as Simone said, we now have a portal. We can continue to have people file through the Get CTC portal. it's not too late. If they want to file and get EITC and other state level tax refunds, really having a VITA system in place in your community can be important, and they can use every dollar that you can provide to ensure that that capacity is in your community. Number 3, and this is one that we would love to find more examples for, is partnering with business. Businesses sometimes have access to some of those families who aren't at the threshold of having to file, but can really be key partners, either as employees or as retailers, or consumers of products within your community. Number 4, health systems, hospitals, pediatricians, some of the places where we know we can find low-income families, many families who might be disconnected from other systems and supports. And then I won't steal all the thunder, but I think Simone highlighted that really this back to school and schools in general. Remember, the credit is the highest for 0 to 5, but it goes all the way up to 17. So that means high schools, middle schools, not just those early years, but really trying to help families get the full package regardless of the age of their kids. So those are the 5 recommendations. There's a lot more in the report, but I'll stop there.
Great, thanks, Shelley. And I know you'll be around for some questions if we have some afterwards, and hopefully everybody got the link that got dropped in the chat. So let's move to where the rubber meets the road and get to one of Shelley's great recommendations, was to think about how you partner with states. And for that, Sarah, I'm going to ask you to join us. And I think we have your slides. When you're ready for them, you can let Sierra know. But start telling us a little. I know you're not at the Shaw Foundation anymore, but if you could just start telling us a little bit about the Family Foundation, that would be great.
Of course, and thanks so much for having me today. I really appreciate it and have enjoyed working with you all. So like it was said, I am no longer at the Shaw Foundation. I did just transition to Code for America, where I am helping lead those efforts to work with state and local agencies. So definitely would love for folks who are interested to continue those conversations on how we can get an agency in every state to promote the tax credit outreach work. So, about the Shaw Foundation and where a lot of this work kind of stemmed from in Massachusetts, Shaw Foundation works with government and nonprofit partners to ensure that everyone has what they need to thrive. So we really focused on education, cash access, access to public benefits, health and well-being. And in the beginning of the pandemic, we had funded one of the largest guaranteed income programs at the time in Chelsea, Massachusetts. And at the same time, I was managing a portfolio that was tied to how we can increase access to public benefits. So that included SNAP, PBT, and now taxes. So a lot of when the tax credit work was kind of announced, a lot of this really aligned with the foundation's mission and projects that we had already been working on. So we did a bit of digging, and I thought that this was important to show if this data is all publicly available. So if you want to see the number of kids that could potentially miss out on this money in your state, you can definitely do so, and I can pop the link in the chat. But from our perspective, we knew that an estimated 220,000 folks in Massachusetts did not get their stimulus checks. That number may have changed. This is from a year and a bit ago, but it still was a really shockingly large number for us. We've already talked about how amazing the child tax credit is in terms of cutting childhood poverty and reducing food insufficiency. But in our state, we knew that at least 58,000 kids could miss out on this credit. And then for the earned income tax credit, which can be up to $7,000 depending on the number of kids you have in your situation. We know in Massachusetts, on average, 22% don't claim that money. So I think that's about 1 in 5. So that's a lot of money on the table for a lot of people that weren't accessing it. And so in our kind of role as a foundation, we really wanted to be a convener and collaborator and kind of outreach push to get the word out in our state. Next slide, sorry. So this is where we came up with findyourfunds.org. Our foundation's role, like I mentioned, was really the convener of these really incredible organizations that are the tax experts in Massachusetts. I am definitely not one, but I've learned a lot. Children's Health Watch, the mayor's office in Boston, Boston Tax Help Coalition, Greater Boston Legal Services, Mass Law Reform Institute, of course, ourselves and MassCap really came together to kind of rethink how we can reach out to people who traditionally do not file taxes in our state. They had a lot of learnings. They've been doing this for years. And we had on our side the ability to create and stand up a website in a matter of days to make sure that website was available in 9 languages. And we also provided outreach materials in 11 languages. We met on a regular basis to kind of discuss key issues and really fill in the gaps. So for example, in our state, there were only a couple sites that could help with filing ITINs, and we knew we wanted to reach a lot of immigrant families. So we were able to work as a coalition to kind of route folks to, if they lived in Worcester, we had this amazing person at GBLS who would go to Worcester and help folks file ITINs. And so that was just a good example of the way our coalition worked. I'll pause here, Bonnie, because I don't know if you have another question or if you just kind of want me to keep going.
One of the questions I'd ask
Yeah.
you, Sarah, is talk a little bit about how the work and this investment actually supported a more equitable recovery in Massachusetts.
Definitely. I mean, we heard stories of, and Simone mentioned this too. One woman we talked to was able to, she had missed her tax credits for her children and her stimulus payments and was able to access $16,000. And she found out about that money through a text message. So in terms of supporting access here, I mean, we were able to bring in through kind of this coalition and simple website, thousands of dollars to our community, our individuals and families who needed it most, and also into our local economy and businesses as well.
Great. Well, Sarah, thank you. That was super helpful and great insight, and great to, again, hear how states can play a really important role in this challenge we have around reaching those families that are really hardest to reach and really making a significant difference in their life. So thank you for that. Allie, I know you've got a local story. And I think it's going to be of particular interest to funders who may be tentative about entering into this space, because I know it was kind of new terrain for you. So I'd ask you the same question to just start out, giving the audience some appreciation for who the Community Foundation for Greater Buffalo really is and the work that you do, and then tell us a little bit about the project.
Fantastic. Thanks, Bonnie. And thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. And I love talking about Buffalo, so I'm excited to talk about our CTC story. So the foundation is a 100-year foundation. We serve 8 different counties in Western New York. And to facilitate long-term change in our community, we go through a really intensive strategic plan every 5 years with our board, with the community. And right now, our 4 community goals are improving education, increasing racial and ethnic equity, protecting and restoring the environment, and strengthening our region as a center for arts and architecture. So I think you'll note that nowhere in those goals is anywhere about tax literacy spelled out. But at the foundation, we really recognize that probably our most important role that we play in the community is our role as a convener. We bring together groups that don't always work organically together. So when we heard about this opportunity last fall, we knew that this was something that we needed in our community. And as a foundation that does convene, we were really uniquely positioned to bring together partners that already existed, that were already in networks that existed through different initiatives. So our board actually approved a contingent matching grant for this opportunity before we even submitted a proposal, which is something that, at least in the 8 years that I've been with the Community Foundation, hasn't happened. But I think we all recognize that this was so important and a space that we really needed to be in.
That's really that. Thank you. Thank you for that. Can you talk a little bit about what some of the challenges were in kind of making those leaps? Because again, it was sort of some new space for you guys to be in. Like, what were some of the challenges? And then we're kind of in a crisis. Like, how did that play out for you?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, there definitely were some challenges. Like, we were in the middle of a pandemic. There were a lot of folks that hadn't worked on this before. But I think that there were really more highlights than challenges. I think what was really inspiring was everyone that we reached out to right off the bat said yes. We reached out to folks, and when we called them, they wanted to be involved in this project. We relied heavily on networks that we had in place with the county, with local nonprofits, with our libraries, with the Buffalo Public School, and they were also nimble and supportive and willing to help. I think something that was also really unique and a highlight of this project is we relied heavily on our youth. So about 5 years ago, through our racial equity work and Obama's Boys and Men of Color initiative, we helped found what's called the Breaking Barriers Initiative. So it's a group of young men of color, 12 to 24 in age, and they're a unified voice for racial equity and social justice in Buffalo. And these Breaking Barriers youth worked with one of our lead nonprofits in this initiative, Say Yes for Education. And they were all trained as tax specialists and tax screeners. So these teens acted as ambassadors in their own communities. They worked weeknights, they worked weekends, they worked at community schools, and they helped their families, they helped their community file taxes. And I think this was also more than just tax services in our community. What was really special is we use this as an opportunity to check in and provide wraparound services in the community. For instance, we've been telling the story of a grandmother who came to one of our Saturday Academy schools where we had tax prep services available. And she had custody of her 3 grandchildren, and her oldest daughter was actually working as her caretaker because she was terminally ill. And she was there to file her tax credit support. And Say Yes, which was, again, our lead partner in this, was able to identify more than just tax support. They were able to connect her with kinship care resources. They were able to connect her with a more safe and affordable housing. They were connected to a Say Yes specialist who is able to do check-ins. So this grant was really more impactful than just getting dollars into our community.
Great, thank you. Allie and Sarah, I'm wondering, Sarah M., if you might jump back in again, because I know that Allie, you mentioned something about schools and sort of the roles that they play. And Sarah, I know that was a big piece of the work that you're doing. And for this audience in particular, if there's more that you would say about that level of engagement, I'd invite both of you if there's a little bit more you might want to say about that piece.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. So we targeted, I think it was the top 30 districts using this list that was available that showed where kids were most likely to miss out on the child tax credit. So I went to every city and district in the top 30 and said, hey, there's potentially, thousands of dollars on the table that kids in Revere, for example, could miss out, and was able to work with the city and the district. So from a school perspective, I traditionally worked with the communications office to text families, and we had materials in 11 different languages. So it was really easy. They are available for national use in case anyone wants them. And I can put a link in the chat, but however you communicate best to your families, please do so. I tried text as number one, email, and then we also trained family liaisons. So we led for example, Boston Public Schools, they have 94 family liaisons that meet regularly. So we went and trained them. And even in that, you could see on people's faces, one woman was like, oh my gosh, I didn't get this money. So even, speaking to staff and then having them talk to their families as trusted messengers really seemed to work. And I will note Boston Public Schools did send out a text to 48,000 of their families. And we had, I think, 10,000 of those click through to our website. So there's a lot of engagement. The phone lines went crazy in Boston. So it's always good to check when you're putting a phone number in to make sure that they have the capacity, but it really shows the interest in families and getting access to this money and the trust that schools have with them.
Yeah, I think it's really important to think about sort of the infrastructure that's already there. And I know, from years ago, work that I did back with the foundation was with our EITC campaign. And so much of that was sort of the infrastructure that was built with VITA that you can really kind of build off of for some of these, and great lessons learned from all of that we can benefit from. But I think a crisis and a pandemic does make things uniquely a little bit more interesting. Ally, I would like to ask you too the same question about how the investment really supported a more equitable recovery in Buffalo. And we know that there are Buffalo is in the news in a big way these days. And just curious as to you guys think about race, equity, and inclusion in your community and how this work actually supported some of those aspirations.
Thanks, Bonnie. Yeah, all the work we do at the Community Foundation, we do through a racial equity lens. And that's one of the reasons why we did jump at this opportunity. Buffalo is in the news. I think that you've all been reading about what's happening in Buffalo. But Buffalo is the third poorest city in the country. Our childhood poverty rate stands somewhere around 43%, which is the second highest rate in the nation. 3/4 of our students who attend Buffalo Public Schools are eligible for free breakfast and lunch. So we knew entering this work that we would have thousands of families who were eligible for this credit, but weren't receiving the tax benefits that were deserved to them. They just weren't aware of it, or they weren't filing. So what was really powerful about this initiative, and something that it was unique to other initiatives that we've been involved in, is we were putting money directly into the pockets of our residents that were most in need. And there were no stipulations. They had the ability, they had the power to do with this money that was theirs, with what they knew they needed to do with it. In just the first 3 weeks during that phase 1 of this project, over $1 million in tax returns flowed through our community. Over the course of the entire project, we were just about $2 million in tax returns, with an average of $4,319. So most of our community members rent their homes. Like, this is back paid rent. A third of our community, they don't own a car. Like, this could be a down payment on a car. And this is money that is in their hands with the ability to do with what they needed to do. So I think by design, this really does support a more equitable recovery in Buffalo.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And Ally, thank you for kind of giving us the local story. And Sarah, thank you too. We wanted to kind of move from a state down to a local. And I'd like to kick it over to Amy now. And Amy, I know that you do a lot of work sort of with a broader coalition of community foundations. And we've talked a little bit about sort of the particular unique role that community foundations can play in this space. And I would love for you to talk to us a little bit about that. But before you do that, share a little bit about the collaboratives that you support. I know we go back quite some time. So you've been at this in this space for quite a while. So just share a little bit about the collaboratives and then talk a little bit about the role of community foundations in this space.
Great, glad to, and thanks for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all. So the EITC Funders Network has been around since 2004, working with local foundations, regional foundations, and national foundations to do this exact thing, to help make sure that our lowest income working families get the tax credits for which they're eligible, which for the longest time was all about the EITC, and certainly in the last year has been a lot about the child tax credit, which is our topic here today. And it has been an especially great pleasure to have had the opportunity in this last year to work with some community foundations. Ally and our great partners in Buffalo have been doing some really phenomenal work. Simone and Shelley laid out that this great opportunity that was presented with the American Rescue Plan and the expansion of child tax credit spurred on some incredible activity at the national level and at regional levels to really begin to build this sort of outreach and engagement infrastructure. And one of the things we were noticing was that it was hard to get it down to the local level in many of the ways that Sarah and Ally have just described. And we had the great good fortune with some support of the Annie E. Casey Foundation, Schusterman, Rockefeller, and the Gates Foundation to put together a hold fund, which helped to support and incentivize community foundation partners, including our pals in Buffalo, to lean in and to take a chance, as Ally said, to sort of do something that they maybe hadn't done before, to really look at their community and say, how can we make sure that every family in this community has access to the child tax credits? And, one of the most exciting aspects of this work is that we were able to partner with 24 community foundations who did this work in 24 completely different ways. That was really driven by who those community foundation partners were, who their community partners are, and what were the needs in their community. So it was really an exciting opportunity to test lots of different things and to move things pretty quickly so that families could get the credits to which they are eligible.
Thanks. Thanks, Amy. Just wondering, again, have community foundations, have they learned from other things in crisis, or was this crisis particularly unique, kind of juxtaposed to this great opportunity?
Yeah.
And I'm sure that you're more facile, right? I mean, there is just some more greater flexibility you have when you're closer to the ground, but just anything more that you could say about what was particular about this moment?
Yeah, it was an incredibly important moment, but also we walked this path with the community foundations because we believe that it's those entities who understood the communities the best and would know like how to find those hardest to find families, as Simone was saying, those who were not already getting the checks, who were most likely to miss out. We knew that was hard to do at a high level, and it had to be driven. And one of the most interesting things, Bonnie, was that we found that many of the community foundations that we've been working with were building on already existing strategies and already existing partnerships to do this work. So for example, building on their census outreach work, building on their vaccine outreach work, building on health outreach like promotoras models, et cetera, like taking these things that they had been working and hammering out over the years and saying, hey, we can add tax credits as a piece of this work and really help to build on that. This is why, I think I feel so great about the work in Buffalo. It's a great example of a community foundation which had these strong partnerships with an education lens and partnered with their friends at SAS Buffalo to yield just incredible results, adding on to that strength there in the community.
Well, and I'm thinking that there is also the opportunity, right, for new folks to come to the table who perhaps hadn't been there before. And I think that's something maybe everybody can talk about at some point, because we'll move into some just kind of bigger conversation with everybody involved. But I'm curious to start with you, Amy, in your perspective. Do you feel like there were new folks that kind of came up, maybe perhaps more organizations of color who perhaps had not been part of the conversation before, that now we're playing a much more active role and we're seen more as the go-to organizations to kind of make sure that the outreach happened?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things that we see in the tax credits work generally is that organizations of all kinds, once they understand what you're talking about, they think, oh, we can do that. That's about helping families get money into their pockets. And they immediately see the translation to what that means in terms of being able to afford more at the grocery store, putting gas in the car, getting new tires, paying down debt. And so it has been our sense that this moment, the expansion of child tax credit in particular, brought a lot of new players to the field. I'm thinking about one of our grantees in particular who had done a lot of work historically with a faith leader in an immigrant community, doing in terms of sort of housing security and food security. And when this community foundation began a conversation with that faith leader about this new thing, taxes sound kind of scary, once they explained how easy it was to do and use the Code for America portal, that faith leader said, oh, we know how to do this. We know how to talk to our families about accessing benefits. And they set up this incredibly robust information exchange with their congregants and the members of their community to make sure that they knew how to get the information and how to get enrolled. And it's that piecing together, like sometimes we would call this the last mile kind of work. How do you get it pretty far? And then our local community foundations, local foundations and their partners really doing that piecing together to go from this great idea to cash in families' pockets.
Great. Thank you. Super helpful. Super helpful. I'd like to bring us all back into the room again in terms of the panelists. And first of all, Amy, thank you so much. Really appreciate you being with us today and kind of sharing the insights that you have. I want to encourage the folks who are participating with us to enter your questions into the Q&A box and that you'll be willing to share your feedback in a short poll that we're going to be providing before we log off today. But before we do that, I'm just going to throw some questions out to the group. Anybody who feels that they'd like to respond to it, feel free to respond. And I think one of the first things that I'll ask, and Shelley suggested that this was something that got raised back in November as a question when we started this conversation with funders about CTC, is that we know that this expansion is not permanent. Why do funders really need to be engaged in this for the long haul? I mean, the tax season is over. I did my taxes. It was really scary, but I did mine this year. And we think that there are still opportunities to stay involved. And so I would be really curious to hear from you guys a little bit about how you're thinking about that in terms of what's the what's the motivation for funders to kind of stay in this space. Shelley, you want to start since you asked that question?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, because I do think, you know, as you've heard, this is new for some foundations. We, you know, in America don't think about the tax system sometimes in the same way that we think about other human service delivery systems and structures in our country. And yet what has been so clear is that potentially $90 billion of supports to low-income families got out the door this last year, and through the IRS. And so how do we connect tax credits and the IRS and sort of the structures around tax credits to our human service delivery system? And what we learned, I think, and despite you know, the people on the phone doing amazing work, is that across the country, we've got a lot of work to do to connect those systems together. And that doesn't go away, even if the bump up in the child tax credit and the refundability still will be, I think, a congressional fight for the next few months, hopefully not longer than that, but that infrastructure still has to be in place. Even if we go back to a smaller amount, there were families before this expansion that were missing the child tax credit and the EITC. So I think this is the hard work. This is the real work where funders play a really critical role, as Ali talked about, in sort of being a convener and getting to the right local partners. As Sarah talked about, as many of you have board members who are in the business community or in local government who can really sort of knit the community level infrastructures together to make sure that human services support systems and the tax support systems really are connected and working together to find the families who need that support the most. So I don't think that this is over and done at the end of the, you know, the 2021 tax filing system. I just think that this is a chance for us to see where the gaps are and double down for the next time we have another expansion, for the next time we need to get cash out to families in a really quick and urgent and efficient way. We can be part of that change.
Sarah, Ali, you got anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I can jump in. I think so often some of our work is one-offs, and we build this infrastructure and then the work comes to a close. And for example, I was very involved in our work on the census. And for 2 years, blood, sweat, and tears went into this census work. And then, you know, 2020 comes to a close and it goes away. And so much time has been it working on the child tax credit. We have the partners convene, we have a strategy, we have a uniform communications. And it seems like the return on investment was just so strong. I mean, $2 million into our community, that to not stay involved in this work would just be a complete waste of all the efforts. And truly, it was work that was already happening. We did not recreate the wheel. We only enhanced, you know, we had 30 years of VITA work that was already happening in our community. Say Yes was already engaged with these families that qualified. So it's not like you are having to, you know, put in all of this new effort. It's really enhancing what is already happening. So to not stay engaged when we saw the success and, you know, money flowing into our most at-risk families, I can't imagine us not remaining involved.
Sarah?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I agree with everything that was said, so I don't have a ton to add, but I think Shelley's right. Like, regardless, before this tax credit, 1 in 5 people were missing out on the EITC. So this is still a problem. And now we have a lot of tools and we know how to reach people, and we're still learning. And then from our perspective too, we still have hundreds of thousands of people coming to these websites that we've created, wanting to learn more. So we're using, like to Allie's point, a lot of this outreach and relationships that we've already set up. And we talk about the Affordable Connectivity Program. We talk about SNAP. We talk about other benefits. Like, we're kind of using these and partnering with our state agencies to connect all of these programs. So it's more of a systemic approach than here's this new thing that you now have to sign up for. So we're trying to kind of use the outreach and the relationships that we already have and just continue them and try to do it with other things too.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you all have just identified is what we have been talking with our foundation members about, which is just thinking about how this moment, the tax credit moment, was a way to help build and continue to build capacity in communities to do all of these things that you have been doing and have been wanting to do more of. This will not be the last opportunity. We're hoping it'll be more on the tax credits, but there will be other things. SNAP, subsidized childcare, accessing subsidized, there's many different elements here in terms of building capacity so that we close the distance between our families in need and the benefits to which they are eligible.
Yeah. So this outreach and access continues to be a challenge. I mean, for 20 years ago, when I started working at the Casey Foundation, this was my work. And we were really talking about challenges then to try to get folks to get their EITC. And so we know that those are some. I'm just curious, are there other things that you guys are seeing as sort of gaps or things that are missing in the field that philanthropy is particularly well suited to kind of step into that space and help expand, like the work beyond just outreach? There are lots of things, right, that we could be doing. So any advice you have for folks who are on the phone about how they could throw their hat into this ring? And Allie, I know you can tell them, don't be afraid, the water is warm. But just if you guys have some ideas about that you'd like to share, that would be helpful.
Yeah, maybe I'll start because we've been giving this a fair bit of thought, because this is not, there's lots of elements to the work and you have to think a little bit about what's a good fit for your foundation. So it might be that direct service connection. Maybe there's a research piece that is a better fit for your foundation. One I will raise up because I think it has both short-term and long-term implications is about story collection and storytelling. One of the things that we have done in our little effort is really try to encourage the community foundations to be out there gathering those stories and telling those stories, because in the real time, it's helping families see other families just like them who've gone out and got their taxes done and good things happened. And so that virtuous cycle on the outreach in the moment. But it's also a way to help shift the narrative more generally about how hard it is to be a low-income person in this country, how hard it is to work hard and not be able to make ends meet, and how government assistance and these public benefits really matter a lot. And so shifting that narrative, is an incredibly important job that philanthropy can dig in on.
Yep. Thanks, helpful. Anybody else have anything they'd offer? Advice to funders? Sarah, with your old funder hat on?
Yeah.
What do you wish? What would you tell them now?
This is one thing that I have been thinking of in terms of working with agencies at the Shaw Foundation. So I don't know how much I mentioned, but we, our state agency who serves SNAP and TANF clients, did a series of text messages to folks and sent text to 480,000 people. And each time, I think over 100,000 people clicked through, and we were able to bring like $11 million in with a single text. So really incredible work. But for states that can't do that, and I know that there's still ways that people can be really creative. And I think one example, and what we did last year and found it to be effective, was states are already sending out, and maybe cities and other agencies too, notices about PBT, summer pandemic EBT, to their clients. we stuck, and it was very cost effective, $10,000 for a little flyer that went to 650,000 families about tax credits. And it didn't cost the state any more money because it was just a simple insert. And our reach was able, we reached 1 in 7 people with that mailer in our state. So I think that's a really good, like, simple and tangible kind of on my wish list as I work with other states, where I think philanthropy can play a really good part in kind of making these connections. The PBT folks, states will only have their information for a limited period of time, so we want to get in front of them. My other thought, I'm just mulling over this constantly, is the need for a hotline or phone support. Every time we sent out a text message, people really wanted to call, and even if they could do it themselves, they wanted like a check. Am I really eligible? This sounds way too good to be true. I just need someone to tell me. And I think that could be another place where maybe it's already happening in some states. It's unfortunately not in Massachusetts, but where I think philanthropy could play a big role, or even mentioning it like on our 211 hotline for anyone that calls in for childcare assistance, mention the child tax credit, that kind of thing.
I totally agree with what Sarah said. I think we learned a lot from our COVID PPE outreach, where if people are already coming to these centers to look, get PPE equipment, to get food, you're already meeting people where they're gathering. So that was where we centered our census efforts. I mean, people aren't going to be seeking out census flyers, but they are seeking out, food relief. They are seeking out hand sanitizer. So adding on to efforts that are already happening, it's low cost. So if there's mailers already going out, if there's robocalls from BPS already, scheduled, adding on at the end, make sure that you enroll for, tax prep at a community school on Saturday. 211 was an incredible partner. So anyone who is calling 211 for anything, home eviction support, food kitchens, what they call 211, we also use that as an opportunity to say, like, oh, we are holding these tax specialist prep centers. Why don't you sign up? So, really not having standalone efforts, but engaging our community where they're already calling and already getting that outreach.
Yeah. Go ahead, Sean.
Sorry, one more sort of layer in, I think, too important to know, and we didn't really highlight this, but there are particular populations that we knew we had a harder time reaching and getting to, and the two I will flag. One is the immigrant or mixed status family populations, many of whom had to get I-10 numbers before they could even apply, and that process can be pretty arduous, and I know our federal partners are working on streamlining some of that sort of backlog in the I-10 process, but really trying to understand immigrant communities and getting into trusted partners with trusted partners in immigrant communities is super important. The other thing that still shocks me is that babies who were born in 2021 actually did not get the first half of the payments automatically. So even if you were a family who filed taxes before but had a baby in 2021, you weren't getting the money. You had to file taxes this year or come through the portal now to get monies for babies. And you all are probably reading, like me, the news about the formula recalls and the struggles that families with babies in particular are having right now. So, WIC offices, formula pantries, milk banks, all of these places where we know we might be really missing some families with very young children. And for this group in particular, in the campaign for grade level reading, like, we know how important those early years are for addressing, family stress, for addressing maternal attachment, for addressing early learning. Like these are critical windows of time. And I think focusing in on babies is maybe another place that you could be doing in your communities, just to make sure that we're getting to those folks who need it most.
Yeah. And Shelley, I would go back to your earlier point about the report talking about the role for employers, because I know, again, during the pandemic, employers were really struggling, like employees are struggling kind of in this space, and people lost jobs, and now there are jobs available, and folks in the kind of corporate community trying to figure out sort of how to add value in this space, that it may be an opportunity to also kind of re-engage with them in some conversations that may have been stalled in the past, just because I think people are much more receptive to say, what can we do sort of in this moment that is requiring so much more of us than perhaps it has in the past.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think we saw in the data, I think Columbia was mentioned earlier, a lot of this money was used for childcare. So it really was so that people could get back to work. A lot of times if you have a baby, you have to provide a week of diapers before you can get into a childcare slot. So really the financing really helping people back into employment is a really important point. And I think employers get that, and ways to engage with employees in a situation where there isn't really everybody's eligible, it's fully refundable. So you can really be a partner, I think, with government if you work in the business community to really make sure that you're leading in your community.
And I think I read that's right, that because there's been a lot of data that's been gathered, even the US Census with the Household Pulse Survey that gives some ideas about how families are doing around food insecurity and housing and all of those issues we care about. Doesn't really talk about kids, but we know that a lot of those respondents are actually parents. And I think that I read a statistic someplace that talked about the fact that there had been no negative impact on employment for people who had actually received the CTC. So it wasn't like this was some incentive for people to not be employed, that those things work together beautifully. Great. I'm gonna ask Sarah, because she's helping me out here with the chat, if there are some questions that are in the Q&A box that we should be addressing.
We have actually not gotten any questions in the Q&A box so far. So I would encourage everyone who's listening in, any questions that you have for our panel to go ahead and post them there so that we can share them with them and hear some more from those insights. In the meantime, maybe one thing that I'll pose myself is looking forward. We're getting ready for the GLR week later on this summer, and we're focusing on bright spots and silver linings. And I certainly feel like the last year's child tax credit was an incredible bright spot from the pandemic. We want to see that bright spot continued, but what bright spots and silver linings would you lift up, each of you, given your work around the child tax credit over the past year, looking forward? And again, I'd encourage everyone listening in to go ahead and post your own questions in the Q&A box as well.
So Sarah, did you want to call on somebody?
I'll start with Shelley, if you could share something.
Yeah, I think one bright spot from the sort of philanthropic perspective is a level of coordination and collaboration that I think I'd not seen before, and a sense of urgency, which, as those of you in the funding community know, is sometimes hard to come by. So I think as a process level, that was a certain bright spot. But I'll let the on the ground outreach folks talk about kind of the things that they saw. The other thing I will mention, because I would be remiss if I didn't, is I think also the integration of both implementation and advocacy. And if you're able to fund advocacy and to do, as Amy said, build the story banks and make sure that your legislators know how important this was to your communities. Oftentimes we aren't implementing at the same time, we're also still fighting for the policy, but we really had that as both a challenge and an opportunity. And I think it remains a challenge and an opportunity. So if you're able to work on advocacy, I think that's another bright spot. And there's a lot more voices in this fight right now than there ever have been.
Thanks. And I just dropped the social media and outreach toolkit in the chat box so that folks can utilize that as they're doing that advocacy and outreach effort.
I'm happy to share a few bright spots. I did touch on a few of them when I talked earlier, but I think just like the diverse array of folks that were working on this it's always inspiring to see groups that don't always work together, working together. So having youth, like especially youth of color, so engaged and working weekends because they cared so much about getting their families and their communities enrolled. I thought that was incredibly inspiring. We have a really robust library system, and we've worked with the libraries on many different initiatives, and they're always so willing to help. especially when there's internet access issues in our community, like having just such a safe space that is readily available for community members. They always just jump in. We met weekly, like we had a core group of different partners, a mixture of the libraries, 211, faith-based community members, Say Yes, government. Erie County was incredibly involved in this, but everyone always showed up. Even the groups that have been working on this for many years, like our VITA sites have been active for 30 years. There were no like territory issues. Like they were only happy and excited to see the efforts that they've been working on enhanced with, brighter and bolder communication efforts. And we had only 3 no-shows over the entire course of this initiative for people who enrolled in tax prep. So we did rely heavily on technology, which I think that might be something that if we did move forward, we need to think through, because I'm sure we missed some of the community because they enrolled using like QR codes or calling 211. Like that was definitely a heavy aspect of our communications campaign. But to have only 3 vacancies over the entire several month enrollment process, I think was definitely a highlight.
Thanks for that. Sarah, would you like to add?
Yeah, I can share too. I mentioned the school district outreach earlier, and schools are just so slammed right now with everything going on. And I think a major bright spot was for them. They recognized the importance of getting this money to their students and families. And so they were going to do anything, no matter kind of how crazy things were right now, to really help. And we saw measurable outcomes and really a lot of money into the hands of folks. So that was a major bright spot. And then kind of like Ali said too, the cross-agency collaboration. I mean, we had cross-state collaboration because of this group we're able to convene. And like the I-10 example I gave earlier, they were able to work in ways that we hadn't before. And because of some of the connections that we had, we were able to get a meeting with the WIC team. And, that hadn't happened at the state level yet with these groups. And so we're able to facilitate connections that will be around for a very long time as they outreach for other programs as well.
So I'll just sort of throw in, maybe in addition to all these bright spot points that my colleagues have raised, I'll maybe raise like a challenge bright spot intersect, which is, I think this experience also shown some pretty bright lights on flaws in our system. Why is it so hard for people to get their taxes done? Why it can be very expensive, and our system that is not the paid preparers relies heavily on volunteers, and that, while a wonderful gift, is hard to build and maintain. And I think it presents a set of questions and challenges to us in philanthropy and the community to think about how can we fix some of these upstream problems so that it's not so hard the next go.
Yeah, and probably not the last question for the group to end on, but I just think it's great to talk about sort of what are those challenges. I'd like to kind of continue this line of thought that Amy just introduced, like where are the biggest challenges? Where are the biggest mistakes? Like, what do you wish you hadn't done? What do you wish you had done better? If you were going to give advice to another funder or one of your colleagues who was entering into this space, like, what would you say? Like, don't do that. Because we did that and it really didn't work. I think that there is so much that we learn from mistakes, but it's not always a place as the funders that we're always that comfortable kind of sharing. But amongst friends, if there are things you'd say like, that's a gotcha, if I were you, I wouldn't head down that road. Share some of that, some more of that.
Okay, I'm gonna throw out the lowest hanging fruit, which is start early. I mean, I feel like we it was just incredible that all this got done, and imagine what we could have gotten done if we had had the luxury of starting now for next tax season. And so, hindsight is I wish we had the time to start a lot earlier.
I mean, I think that's right, which is why I think this back to school push and really trying to get prepped for when you have particular opportunities in community to engage with people with children is really important. it's very hard to say what's a mistake, because I think we were trying a lot of different things and we didn't get to everybody. So, was it a mistake to do door knocking when that didn't yield the kinds of numbers that like Sarah was able to see in the text messaging from SNAP agencies? Well, yeah, it was a harder lift, but we don't really have a good understanding of who that might be able to find that you wouldn't find through a text message. So I think as a foundation, you have to think about who's in your community, who do you think is potentially missing, and then what are the strategies to try? Not that there are ones that are bad or mistakes, but we've got to keep trying and get better at finding the families that, even Allie was talking about the question of like who could access through technology and who couldn't. So so there aren't mistakes as much as further refined questions that I think we are starting to learn, but really leaning into your community. And as Amy said, as national funders and folks that work with a lot of national funders, we couldn't do that. So we were sort of, throwing darts at the dartboard and hoping that things hit. But I think in communities, you can make much better decisions about what's good to try, what's worth trying. And then you find the mistakes and, teach the national donors. I love in the beginning drawing at GLR that, right, like local funders leaving, but really helping national funders learn more. And I did see one quick Q&A in here, which Kim asked, which is right. Even though, I just want to stress this, even though tax filing season is over, there is you can go to getctc.org or the website childtaxcredit.gov, and there's still a portal and families can still file. And by the way, you can always go back and file your taxes for, I believe it's 3 years, somebody tell me. So even at the end of this year, there's still opportunities to get families their tax credit. So there's still resources. Sarah dumped in a toolkit. You don't have to reinvent the wheel and sit down and start like figuring out your own infographic or designing your own flyers. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's all free and available in that social media toolkit. And thanks to many of the people on the phone here for contributing your work into the greater good of just collective knowledge. And so you don't have, if you're going to get started on this, you don't have to start from scratch.
Cool.
I'll add one kind of like an antidote. I don't know if it's a mistake, but maybe more of advice. So when we first heard about this, our executive director passed this along to a colleague of mine at the Community Foundation and said, like, we should jump on this. Like, this is something that's really important in our community. Let's get involved with the childhood tax credit. We looked at each other and we thought, wow, this is something that we know next to nothing about. And I always pride myself on knowing a little about a lot of things, but I've never filed my own taxes. I know very little about, I have tax specialists, they get all my paperwork, I have a file, but I don't, this is not something that is in my wheelhouse. And even when we convened our first group of partners in this, we had our Erie County officials, we had the libraries, all of us thought, like, we really don't have a lot of tax background. Like, how are we going to, make this work when we know so little about it ourselves? And we hired a tax specialist, which was completely integral to the success of this work in Buffalo. She was retired from the IRS. She had over 30 years of experience, and she was able to navigate all the complexities of tax law. Any question that somebody had, she knew the answer to, and like she was the leader of this team. I mean, Say Yes was on the ground. They were the ones who had the relationships, but every question flowed through Barbara. So I don't know if every community has the ability to get themselves a Barbara, but she really made this work here in Buffalo.
Thanks, Allie.
I just want to add something too real quick. So one also piece of advice too is that words really matter. And I think that's what we've learned through this process. So the outreach materials provided are really, really strong. And I think they're born out of everything that we learned. Because last year, I don't know, in my view, like if you're trying to reach people who don't file taxes, typically don't lead the with taxes or file, that messaging is really scary. You know, and our messaging was all around like the amount that you could get. You could get thousands of dollars in federal money. And we really intentionally tried to align it with COVID payments because folks had been receiving those. It was something that they were used to getting. So just a note that the materials have a lot of thought built into them, and I really appreciate that. But every words really count here. And everything, at least we developed, was at a 5th grade reading level as well. One thing kind of on my wish list that I think Shelley mentioned a bit, but is the ability to track data so you can really see ROI as a foundation. That's really important. And for us, we really have been poking for the Treasury and IRS to release data so that we can see the number of non-filers in our state, and hopefully what last year we would have seen an increase. Unfortunately, that data isn't really publicly available, except if you use Code for America's Get CTC tool. So if you use that, you can see actually the number of returns, the average amount per person, and then the total amount too coming in. So in terms of like evaluation of different outreach strategies, that's definitely one that I would recommend. And if anyone has a chance to uplift that we need more data, I think we should, but just wanted to raise that as well.
Thanks. Sarah, if I'm going to ask you if there's any other questions that I should be paying attention to. Otherwise, I think I'm going to give people the gift of a few more minutes of their afternoon. And also, I'll just ask the panelists one more time, if there's anything I didn't ask you that you wish you had, that I wish I had asked, do it now. If everybody is good, I think I'm going to just kind of wind us down for the day and do a close. And first of all, I would really like to just thank all of the presenters. Thank you guys so much for the planning and the conversations. And I think the poll, that's another thing I was going to say, go ahead and launch the poll because we're going to get ready and shut this down. I see it on my screen, so hopefully you see it on yours as well. I want to thank the participants, the folks who joined us today. Really appreciate that. And really so many thanks to Sierra and to Sarah, who are my GLR team that really works the magic for these events. And most of all, to my partner in this webinar, to Shelley Waters-Foots, whose advice and expertise has been extremely valuable in orchestrating this afternoon. So Shelley, couldn't have done it without you. Thanks so much. I want to remind folks to not forget about GLR Learning Tuesdays and other campaign events. I think Sarah talked about GLR Week that's happening in July, so stay tuned for more information. And just in closing, I'd like to say to all of you that I think we all know that disrupting generational poverty helps to ensure more hopeful futures for children, which is why the Campaign for Grade Level Reading is really vested in supporting the economic well-being of parents and families. So we look forward to teeing up future conversations that will explore effective asset building strategies for low-income families. There are time-tested approaches. We've talked about a lot of those today, and we've talked about innovative ideas as well. So let's keep talking and learning together and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much to everybody. Bye.
Thank you.